gave us $25 million and we named the school after him. You remember that? Does it seem like a long time ago or just the other day? Just the other day. Well, today we have a very distinguished guest who I don't anticipate will give us $25 million.
I'm sorry, maybe $25.
But she will give us a great deal of food for thought. Dr. Katie Liljenquist, who is an assistant professor of organizational leadership and strategy at Brigham Young University, and has been gracious enough to accept our invitation to come and talk to us today about some very exciting research that she's been doing. She's a graduate of Arizona State University and has her doctorate from Northwestern University, the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago. And without giving away the story today, I can tell you that after today's lecture, you may be more inclined to wash with soap. You may be more inclined to buy Windex products. You may be more inclined when approaching your parents for some financial assistance to try to find them when they are in a clean room. All of these findings are related to Dr. Liljenquist's very interesting research, which has been published in the prestigious journal Science, has been picked up and published and talked about in the New York Times. She has published research in journals of the Harvard Law School called Negotiation, and is an experimentalist, which is rare, actually, in business schools. But as we talked with Katie this morning at lunchtime and learned about her research in more detail and its relationship to ethical decision-making, we saw how exciting and a vibrant mind she has and what an extraordinary and talented person she is in terms of her research design. I know that our friends down at BYU value her greatly, and we're very pleased that she made the trip, notwithstanding the snow, down from her home in Idaho Falls. So will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Katie Liljenquist to our Dean's Convocation.
I'll switch mics here. Okay. So let me make sure you can all hear me. Let's see. Okay, can people hear me in the back? All right, all right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to such a large group about some research that I've been working on. Most of my research, as Dean Anderson explained, is very psychological in nature, and it looks at how just very subtle manipulations can fundamentally alter the way that people respond to information, the way they treat others, the way that they view their environment. And so I'm going to talk about two distinct lines of research that I'm involved with. One looks at how people attempt to cleanse their conscience, literally, and another one looks at power and corruption. But the common thread that they share is that in both cases, you'll see just very subtle manipulations, whether it's getting people to think about a certain thing or exposing them to a certain environment, all at an unconscious level, can fundamentally alter the way that they behave. These are some of the collaborators that I work with on these projects. And so I want to cover a lot of material here today. We'll see how much I get through. But don't be shy in asking questions as we go along. I'll also try and save some time at the end. Or if there's clarification, just put up a hand. And we'll get started with our first topic here. So everyone wants to believe that they're a good moral person, and that's a pretty universal desire. Even after making really bad choices, people are remarkably resilient in their moral self-image, and we may observe other people who do something terrible and think, how do they live with themselves? Well, humans are very clever, and there are all kinds of mechanisms that we employ to justify bad behavior in the past or to perhaps license us to engage in immoral behavior in the future. And this ranges from being involved or looking at maybe aspects of ourselves that are more flattering. So say, for example, I do something unethical, maybe a little too painful for me to dwell on that, but if I instead think, well, you know, maybe I'm not the most honest person, but I am reliable. I always show up on time. And I focus on another part of myself that can boost my self-esteem. That can be an effective way to deal with it. Other people, they'll engage in favorable social comparisons. The whole, well, at least I'm not as bad as that person. And in fact, my career as an ethics researcher started when I was an undergrad, and I was a participant in a study about deception. When they debriefed me at the end, I was so blown away that I said, I want to start working for this professor, and eventually switched from biochemistry to psychology. But what that looked at was how when people tell lies, specifically damaging lies, they denigrate the individual that they've lied to. So in this study, they were the thing that had inspired it, they were looking at intermarital affairs, and once people have affairs, what happens when they lie to a spouse. And what they found is that if you tell someone a damaging lie, and then later you ask, okay, well, what are your perceptions of this person that they've lied to? Suddenly, we don't think that they're very honest either, or that they're very trustworthy either. And so there are all these different ways that we can try and bring others down or make attributions about them to make the comparison not quite so painful and still preserve, in spite of unethical acts, a moral self-image of ourselves. So there are these different tactics. What I want to talk about today, though, is a very literal way that people try to cleanse their conscience. And any of you who are familiar with Shakespeare's play Macbeth know about the scene where Lady Macbeth, who's been conspiring for the murder of the king so that her husband can become the king, she starts having these delusions of blood on her hands and becomes obsessive, trying to wash this blood off of her hands. And my friend and I, Chenbo Zhang, we were graduate students together. We started talking about that and just talking about, in general, kind of that refreshing feeling you have after you take a shower, or you just feel like you've got this fresh start. If there was something to that, and we thought, well, I wonder if people really do feel cleansed morally after they shower or they wash their hands, and I wonder if it works. So what I'm going to talk about for the first portion of this today is how, first of all, we're very flexible in how we can respond to threats to our moral self-image. And so obviously direct restitution is a clear answer, that if we've stolen from someone, we can go back and return the money. But many times that is either embarrassing, or it's not convenient, or may not even be feasible to engage in direct restitution after an unethical act. And so there are all these indirect means. And this is specifically one where being able to physically cleanse yourself may actually remove some of the moral stains that are created. So let me jump in and tell you a little bit about the origins of this. Now, the idea of there being a relationship between physical and moral purity is not new. In virtually every major world religion, there are practices that are a very fundamental part of the religious ceremonies in which physical cleansing is a surrogate for moral purification. And so you see this in Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, that people prepare to approach God, or they're cleansed of sins through somehow washing. And what I would argue is that this remarkable similarity across all different religions is perhaps rooted in an underlying link, very deep psychologically, that we have as humans between physical and moral purity. Now, we see this in other things aside from religious practices. So in language, historically, when there are very abstract concepts, humans will take a very distinct, concrete thing that they can understand, language-wise, to try and comprehend and communicate that concept. So this light and dark is an example, but clean and dirty is an example. One of my friends from China said, oh yeah, the word for thief in Chinese literally is a pair of dirty hands. And you might think about dirty politicians, or cleaning, taking out the laundry. I mean, all these kinds of things, cleaning house. So we use these concrete concepts to try and express more metaphorical, more abstract concepts. And even now neuropsychologists are doing a lot of research looking at this overlap. In disgust research, you'll find that the same part of the brain that's activated when, for example, a roach crawls across the dining table is the same part that when you read about some terrible murder. That same part is activated in the brain, and so there's this neural overlap between moral and physical disgust. And so all of these things suggest, you know, there's something at the core of us that equates this physical and moral cleanliness. And so let me tell you a little bit about how we decided to start approaching this. So the three questions that I'll tell you a little bit about as far as the studies that we've done are, first of all, do threats to moral purity activate a need for cleansing? So do we really feel dirty and literally contaminated when we've been exposed to something unethical or we've engaged in something wrong? And does it really relieve the guilt and make us feel better? And then I'm going to turn to some work that I'm doing right now. Well, okay, if that's the case, what about environmental cleanliness? So not just cleaning our bodies, but how might that affect and regulate our ethical choices? So let's first talk about whether there's this link at all. So as my friend and I thought about this idea, we thought, well, we need to establish initially that somehow people equate these two things. And so we had done a survey in an MBA class where we had people rate themselves on a variety of traits in comparison to their peers on attractiveness, sense of humor, cleanliness, throw in all these kinds of things, your ethics. And what we found is that there was a really strong correlation such that the students who thought that they were physically cleaner than their peers in the classroom also thought that they were morally superior. Now, correlations can be due to a lot of things, but we thought, well, okay, at least at some level, people are equating these things together. And so we thought, I wonder if we can actually get people to, if we can activate this cleaning concept by exposing them to ethical or unethical things. So the way we did this, we had participants come into a lab and we told them, we want you to recall a time either when you've done something really ethical or something unethical. And they wrote about this experience, explain any emotions that you might have experienced. And then what a lot of psychologists do when they want to just look at an unconscious level, are certain concepts accessible, they'll have them do word completion tasks. So these are some examples of the words that we had our participants look at. So they would see this, W blank blank H, and they'd be told, as quickly as you can, go through this list of words and complete it in a word in the English language. And we chose words specifically that could be completed either as, you know, something like with, wish, or as a cleansing related term, like wash. The same thing, so S blank blank P, you could complete that any number of ways, but shop, soap, this could be shiver, shower. And what we thought is, okay, if people, after thinking about something unethical, do feel contaminated, it should activate these cleansing concepts. And in fact, that's what we found, that people who had recalled the unethical scenario were much more prone to complete these words as cleansing-related terms. And so we thought, okay, we've got some establishment that there's a link cognitively here. Can we actually then show that, well, people, this affects their choices and they actually feel a need to be cleansed? It's not just raising the concept, but they feel dirty. So the next study that we did was looking at the desire to cleanse. And we did this by, we told them, oh, we're collaborating with a bunch of people in marketing. We're going to have you do a series of studies. We'll start out with our stuff today. And what I told them I was looking at is the correlation between personality and handwriting. And so I said, I'm going to give you this paragraph. I want you, just as quickly as possible in your natural script, to hand copy this, and then we're going to use that to do some analyses, and we'll also ask you a variety of questions about your personality because we want to see if there's a link. So the paragraph that they copied was either this first one. So 2 years ago, when I was a junior partner at a prestigious law firm, I was coming up for promotion against another junior partner, Chris. He'd been working on a major case for the city that would make or break his career at the firm. One night, I happened to come across a key document that Chris was in desperate need of. Now, if they were in the ethical condition, this is how it finished. I pulled it from the cabinet and I placed it without a note on Chris's desk, knowing that he would be so relieved when he arrived to work the next morning. Or if they were in the unethical scenario, it completed this way. I pulled it from the cabinet, I walked over to the office shredder, knowing that now my promotion would be secured. Okay, so they've had to hand copy this either very ethical, benevolent scenario or really nasty, sabotaging scenario. And then later we said, okay, now we're going to be doing the marketing stuff. Well, what we had them do was rate a variety of household products. Now, we had specifically chosen household products that were either innocuous control things, so Post-it notes, Snickers, juice, batteries, CD cases, or cleansing products like laundry detergent, Lysol, Dove, Windex, toothpaste. And the hypothesis here was if not even doing something wrong, but just hand copying, being exposed to something wrong that someone else has done, contaminates us, then these people should express greater desire for these cleansing products. We shouldn't see a difference on the control products. So let me show you what actually happened. So these are the control products. The light blue is the people who hand copied the ethical scenario, and the dark black is the unethical. See no difference in how they rated the control products. But when it comes to the cleansing products, suddenly those are very attractive to people who have hand copied the unethical scenario. So this gave us some evidence that, yeah, these people are gravitating towards cleansing products. Now, if we could get a behavioral measure that as researchers, I mean, it's one thing to get data on people's attitudes, but if you can actually get them to do something to show that people really behave in a certain way, that's even better. And so we tried to think, okay, what can we do to actually see if they will cleanse themselves? And so in this next study, we had people go back to the same test that was in the first study. So you either recall something ethical or unethical from your past. And then at the end of the study, I ran this at the end of the semester. And so I told them, I said, hey, since it's the end of the quarter, we've got a lot of extra materials in the lab that we're just giving away as free gifts. And so you have your choice. And I had a big box of hand sanitation wipes, and I had a big box of pencils. Now, we had pre-tested these to make sure that they were equally attractive gifts, and it was about a 50-50 rate between them. But we said, go ahead and take your choice. They're free. And so, again, what we were thinking would happen is if they really do feel contaminated, they want to be cleansed, the people who have recalled something unethical should be more likely to choose the hand sanitation wipes than the people who had recalled ethical behaviors. And exactly that happened. So this is the percentage of people who chose the hand sanitizing wipes. And you can see that if they had recalled an ethical scenario, it was in the high 30%, whereas unethical recalls, people were significantly more likely to choose the hand sanitizer. And so through concept accessibility and product preferences and then actual behavioral choice, we had pretty good evidence that people really do feel dirty after either recalling their own past trespasses or even being exposed to other people's, that's contaminating to us as well. And so the key question here is, does it actually work then? So if you have the opportunity to cleanse yourself, are you really going to feel better? Does it help absolve you of guilt? And so this next study looks specifically at whether it is effective. Now, there's a lot of research that looks at when people have a core value, whether it's an ethical value, a religious value, a political cause they're fighting for, when that is violated or threatened, they're very, very motivated to try and engage in behaviors that will reestablish that value. Now, as I explained at the beginning, that's not always possible to directly compensate for that. And so they call it self-defense plasticity, that basically we have this flexibility where indirect restitution is very, very effective when we don't have the alternative. And so given this, it's possible that physical cleansing could be a surrogate for moral restitution, and that people, in fact, do want to physically cleanse themselves and that it could work. So the first thing that we had people do, because as we thought about, okay, if we get people to cleanse themselves and then we can measure if they feel guilty, this would be really great. But how do you get people to come in? We couldn't have them come in and do something unethical and then say, go down to the bathroom and wash your hands without that being really suspicious. And so we tried to devise a way that we could get people to cleanse themselves, but in a real natural, unsuspicious way. And so what we decided to do was have them do the ethical or unethical recall task on a computer. And what this allowed us to do, we had a cover story then where, and let me clarify, in this case, everybody wrote about something unethical. Then they were either in a condition where they had the opportunity to cleanse themselves or not. So the ones that were in the condition who had the opportunity to cleanse themselves, they would finish writing about the unethical deed of their past on the computer. And then I would come in the room and say, okay, great, now that you're done with this part of the study, we're going to move on to some paper and pencil tasks. But the Human Subjects Board here has recommended that we provide sanitation wipes for people after they use the public computer. So here you go, you can use this now. So they say okay and unwrap it and wash their hands. If they were in the no cleansing condition, I do the same thing, come in, thanks for finishing this, we're going to move on to the paper pencil task, why don't you come sit here, and they start that, but they're not given these sanitation wipes. And so that's how we gave people the opportunity to cleanse themselves. Now the key things that we wanted to know is, first of all, is this going to change their experience of guilt? If after you wash yourself, it really is effective, you shouldn't experience moral emotions like disgust, guilt, regret, embarrassment, shame, and anger as strongly as people who didn't have the opportunity to cleanse themselves. So we did an emotional assessment immediately afterwards. And then we also thought, there's research that looks at moral compensation. And for example, if you can get people to cheat and then solicit them for a charitable donation, they're much more generous than people who haven't just cheated because they're feeling guilty. They need a way to absolve their conscience. So it's, again, an example of this indirect substitution that people engage in. And so we thought, okay, if we can get people to have an opportunity to do something good that will absolve them of the unethical things that they're recalling, then we have a really great way to try and test about whether the cleansing was effective or not. If you're feeling guilty, yes, you should volunteer for something. If you're not feeling guilty, then you have no motive to go above and beyond what you would ordinarily do. And so the way we did this is at Northwestern, we had to pay our students pretty generously to participate in studies. And so we came in and we said, oh, by the way, there's another student in our department who is working on her dissertation. She has no funding for her research, and so she's looking for people who will come in for free and just volunteer to be participants. Here's a manila envelope. She explains what she's doing. If you're interested, leave your email address, the times that you're available, put it in the envelope, and we'll pass that on to her. We just told her that we'd ask everyone who came into the lab today. So that's their opportunity to do a good deed. And as you can suspect, the hypothesis here is that people who've had a chance to cleanse themselves after recalling something unethical from their past should, one, not feel the same degree and intensity of moral emotions, and two, their volunteerism should drop, because if they're not feeling guilty, they have no particular motive that's compelling them to make up for the past with a good deed. Well, on the emotions, that's exactly what we found. Between people who washed their hands and didn't wash their hands, no difference on non-moral emotions. So they feel equally confident, calm, distressed, excited, these kinds of things. But when you look specifically at the moral emotions, people who had the opportunity to cleanse have a reduction in those moral emotions. So they're not feeling those pangs of guilt. The cleansing is effective for them. And so what implication does this have for the volunteerism? Well, it's pretty remarkable. We had over 70% of the students who didn't have a chance to cleanse themselves sign up on the paper and say, yeah, I'll come in next week and volunteer for Karen's study. That drops in half for people who've had a chance to cleanse themselves. They don't feel guilty. They don't feel any need to do a virtuous act to cleanse their conscience, because they've already had a chance to cleanse their conscience through the hand wipes. So not only are the threats to morality, they increase the accessibility of cleansing concepts, they change the kinds of products that we gravitate towards, but it also reduces the guilt and moral emotions and these compensatory behaviors. Now, what we don't know is, well, how egregious of a sin would this work for? Can you really murder someone and just take a shower and think it's going to go away? We're not suggesting that, although it was really interesting. I had a woman, after an article was published on this, she emailed me and she said, I just read this article and I have to tell you, I work in a public office building and I came into work early one morning. I went into the ladies' bathroom and there was this woman just furiously washing her hands. The whole sink was filled with suds. And so I just thought, well, maybe she has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where they engage in kind of repetitive cleansing behaviors in some cases. And she said, so I just assumed it was that and left. She said, well, the next week I mentioned to the janitor that I had seen this woman. I said, she was so bizarre. And she said, oh, what did she look like? And she said, oh, she had dark hair. She was a Hispanic woman. She's like, yeah, and it was, last Wednesday, yeah. They said, oh, yeah, the cops came in and arrested her and her boyfriend for murder. And she said, this was a modern-day Lady Macbeth. And then when I read the article, people really do these kinds of things. So that was an interesting anecdote to hear from someone about this. But they're definitely, now, it's certainly not a conscious thing. So people don't say, oh, now I feel contaminated. I'll go take a shower and I'll feel better. But at a subconscious level, these are the kinds of behaviors that people engage in. And so I'll tell you a little bit about some of the future studies that we're doing. One thing that's really interesting, we're just looking at initial cuts of the data, but religion, not religion per se, but just religiosity in general, because cleansing practices seem to be pretty universal across all different faiths. But that seems to be a moderator, such that people who are highly, highly religious, because they're so exposed to these kinds of practices and doctrines of moral purification and physical cleansing, or cleanliness is next to godliness, all these kinds of sayings that people hear, that these effects are enhanced for people who are particularly religious, because this link is so tight in their minds and the way that they've been raised. So that's something that we're looking at more closely. This has a lot of implications for image management. So do we assume that when someone's clean cut, that by default they're more ethical and we trust them more? If you think about companies and the kind of companies you want to invest in, to what extent does dial core convey at a subconscious level like an ethical company? We associate dial core with soap and cleaning products, but in fact they're actually a huge chemical manufacturer. That's a bulk of their business. And so it's just very interesting, just subtle ways that we make attributions about people or about companies based on the cleanliness that we observe in them. There are some really interesting studies that look at people's offices and whether they're clean and tidy or not, and the kinds of personality traits that people assume that they must have. Some work that we're doing now looks at dieting and just in general succumbing to temptation. When we feel that we've maybe overate or these sins of gluttony, again, can you wash that away? And so one of the studies, I don't know, do they have Chuck-A-Ramas in Logan? The name of the restaurant kind of says it all, but they have these in Idaho Falls, and this is kind of like the all-you-can-eat place to really, really indulge. And there's usually no restraint. You go back plate after plate to the dessert bar. One of the things that we'd like to do is go into restaurants like this, and if you, upon exiting, ask people to take a survey. And in one case, you give them a gift, or you have them wash their hands with these sanitation wipes or an antiseptic. And then you ask them, well, did you think you really overate? How likely are you to return here? Do those things kind of change after you've had a chance to cleanse yourself? I know sometimes after I've eaten myself silly at Thanksgiving dinner, if I go wash my hands, finish cleaning up the kitchen, like I'm just about at that point, I'm feeling kind of refreshed, renewed, that I can eat some more. And so there are these kinds of questions that if we have a chance also maybe to cleanse ourselves or clean up something, an environment, will that then entitle us to get the chocolate cake or these kinds of things? So we're looking at dieters and how they make choices between getting a salad versus a dessert and these kinds of things by, again, being able to cleanse themselves when they violate their dieting goals or succumb to temptation. Strategic product placement. So what's really interesting, there's actually one of my friends gave me, there's a company that it's called Wash Away Your Sins. And they do hand wipes, they do soap. And so this is something that, you know, is kind of a joke to them, but our research would say actually there's some legitimacy behind this. But with strategic product placement, places like in Las Vegas where you kind of have this locale of sin and vice, would a Bath and Body Works shop do very well located on those malls? And so one of the things that we want to do is go to casinos or adult bookstores, the kinds of environments where people are going to be engaging in something that they might think is ethically deviant. And when we have them exit, give them a survey and then say, oh, okay, as a free gift for coming in, would you like this soap, or would you like, you know, we could do goodies or something. And again, see if people gravitate towards these opportunities to cleanse themselves after even being somewhere that is a little unsavory. So this can be used very strategically with advertisers. If they run soap ads directly after other ads that suggest indulging or unethical behavior, luxury products. There's some people in marketing who find that people feel licensed to buy luxury products after they've done a really good deed. Well, we would say you could almost do the reverse, that after engaging in extravagance or decadence, that then that's when people are going to find soap especially attractive. And then environmental cleanliness. What implications does this have for clean environments and dirty environments and how this influences our behavior? I won't go into great detail, but I'll tell you about one study that we've recently done that looks specifically at how people act in clean versus dirty environments. So what we did is we had people come into our labs and we either trashed them. I pulled out hair, left it on the desk. I put salt packets on them. We put soy sauce on the desk the night before, let it dry, get nice and crusty. We left a stack of trash by the trash can. The chairs were all disarrayed. The marker board was colored up. So they went into this lab and it was filthy. And then in our clean condition, it was, I think, the cleanest lab has ever been. The janitors were probably very happy that some little gnome was coming in at night cleaning things up for them. But they either came into this very dirty lab or this very clean lab. And what a lot of, we had people engage in this trust game that economists use. So the way a trust game is set up is there's an initiator and there's a respondent. So if you're the initiator, I come to you as the experimenter and I say, okay, you're going to be interacting with a partner. It's anonymous. It's a one-shot deal. You're not going to have any repeated interactions with this person. And I'm going to give you $4. This is real money on top of what you're getting paid today. You can keep it. You're going to get the cash. You have $4. You can either keep it or you can send it to the responder in the other room. Any amount that you send to them is going to be tripled. So if you send all $4, it's now a pool of $12. And then it is up to the responder to choose to distribute that money between you and him, however he wants. So if I trust you, I'm going to send all $4 to you because now it's a pool of 12. Hopefully you'll divvy it up with me 6 and 6, and I'm better off now because now I get $6 instead of the $4 if I had just kept it all to myself in the first place. If I don't trust you, I'm not going to send the $4 to you because you could keep all $12 and leave me nothing. So what we did in this study, we used the same game, and we had everyone be the responder role. So they came in, and I told them, okay, you've been randomly assigned to be either the initiator or the responder. You actually are the responder. Your partner is a couple rooms down. It's a one-shot deal. Once he makes his decision of how much money of the $4 he wants to send, I'll be back. So I come back. Everybody's told, okay, your initiator has sent all $4. That means it's now tripled to a pool of $12, and it's your choice. Now I have the big stack of money in my hand. It's your choice to either keep the $12 or choose to divide it in any way you want. So we leave the room, and they write how much money they either want to keep or return to the initiator who had shown them this sign of trust. Now, what we had suspected is that in clean environments, so if clean environments will activate this sense of ethicality, that people should be more fair and generous in returning the money. And that's precisely what we found, was that in the clean lab, people did a pretty close to a 50-50 split. So the mean was $6.07. That's how much money that they returned to their partner. Versus in the dirty lab, they didn't return as much. They felt entitled to keep a little bit more of it. And so we thought, this is really interesting. Even just in a clean versus a dirty environment, people behave in very different ways. Now, one of the follow-ups that we did with it, you could come up with some alternative explanations that maybe if you're in a sloppy room, you just assume that everybody's inconsiderate and you feel that's acceptable. So it's not really that you're activating a sense of ethicality, it's other things. So we did this study again, but instead of doing visual cues where it was either clean or dirty, all we did, it looked identical, we just sprayed lemon-scented Windex in some of the rooms. And again, we were able to get the exact same results. People who were in the clean scented rooms, much more fair and generous in returning money than those who were not in those rooms. So some of the implications there with city sanitation and crime rates, this could be a huge thing. We really want to do a field study that looks at theft deterrence. So companies invest a ton of money in surveillance cameras, all kinds of things to deter employee theft or shoplifting. Could it be just as effective? For example, one of the things that we want to do, we're trying to find a site, is if you just leave a wallet or something, like in a public restroom, and you have lemon-scented air freshener in there, is that going to reduce the rate of theft? So there are all these very subtle ways to influence human behavior that are very cost-effective, totally unobtrusive. People aren't even aware of them, but can really promote better behavior. So I'll take any questions that you've got on that. Let me jump. I'll do that at the very end, because let me jump to, I have until 2:20? Okay, let me jump to some research that I've done on power. And I'm just going to browse through a couple of things on this. But this is something else that influences morality. You probably heard the quote, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You know, is that the real story there, or is something else going on? Is it so inherently corrupting to be given power? Well, what my colleagues and I have found is that power actually immunizes us against constraints, whether they're social constraints through peer pressure or authority, or whether it is constraints in our environment. Powerful people simply don't care. They are very goal-directed, very action-oriented, and they're going to do what they want regardless of what they perceive in the environment. So I'm not going to get into this in a lot of detail. I'll just run through a couple studies and then let you ask some questions. Now this happens, if you think of a typical American icon of power, Donald Trump is a good example for this. So he's someone in business choices that seems to be very freed from constraints. So in Chicago, when I was living there, he had proposed this new Trump Tower. He had no zoning, no financial backing. People thought he would never get it approved. They just started building. This is clearly a man who doesn't look to the environment or to others for social approval to tell him what he can and can't do. You see this in his grooming choices as well. There was actually a funny David Letterman stint that they did. They would play this game where they'd go to a deli across the street. It was called Trump or Monkey. And they would have 3 photos, one of Donald Trump's head and then 2 of an orangutan's head. And they would ask people, can you tell the difference between which one is Trump and which ones are the monkeys? And people were remarkably unable to discern the difference between Donald Trump and an orangutan. That's all to say that this is a man, whether it's his personal behavior, his business choices, what he says to the media, he's very, very unconcerned with social approval, with the kinds of constraints that would regulate other people's decisions. And so what we do when we test this, we don't even have to give people real power. We simply tell them, recall a time when you had power. And so when we do these things in the lab, this is the typical kind of paragraph if we're going to prime power. We just say, please recall an incident in which you had power over another individual or individuals. By power, I mean a situation in which you controlled the ability of another person or persons to get something they wanted, blah, 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 blah. Low power, the exact same thing, except recall a time when someone else had power over you. So this is all it takes. You don't have to give people resources. You don't have to give them control or authority. You just have them recall a time when they had it or didn't have it. Now, what we found that was really interesting, there is some research on power and perspective taking that basically says high power people they find it very difficult to take the perspective of those around them because they're so insular in their thoughts and self-focused. And so to test whether this is really the case, if they do have an impaired ability to take the perspective of others, we had them come in. They either recall the time they had power or recall the time when someone had power over them. And then we said they had to do a bunch of tasks. We said, we want you to draw an E on your forehead. And that was one, and there were other tasks like snap your fingers as fast as you can. So they're going through this packet, doing all these tasks. And if you are focused on someone else, you draw an E so that they can read it. People who can't take the perspective of others, who are thinking of their own mind, they draw it the way they see it in their own head. And so what we suspected is that people who were in the high power condition would be much more likely to draw the E in the self-focused direction. And in fact, they were 3 times more likely to do that. What we didn't expect was, this was a serendipitous finding that led this whole chain of research, was that in high power, we had about 1/3 of our participants refusing to even draw the E. They're like, I'm not going to draw an E on my forehead. It was washable marker, but they didn't want to do it. Whereas low power, I mean, over 90% of them complied and just did what the packet tells them to do. And so we thought, oh, this is really interesting. The high power people are resisting authority. So what kind of implications does that have? Let me skip through this because I want to get to this creativity study. So we thought, you know, if people are willing to resist authority, they don't see the constraints that other people are compelled by, then they actually, you know, one of the beneficial effects is they should actually be more creative, more willing to think outside of the box. And that's exactly what we tested here. So we gave people either high or low power prime and recalling a time that they had power or not. And then we told them, we said, we want you to imagine that you're visiting another planet. And you've encountered a species that's endemic to this planet, and we want you to draw what it looks like. And we manipulated whether we either didn't provide them any example, or in the packet as they read this, they were shown an alien with either no wings or wings. And what we thought is, if high power people really are not as observant about cues in the environment, they should draw whatever kind of wild, crazy aliens they want, whereas low power people who are very attentive to cues in the environment and constraints, they should mimic whatever kind of creature is already provided in the example. So this is what they read. On this page is an example that a previous participant had produced. Keep in mind, however, you need not use or copy aspects of it. Draw your creature on the next page. And so either there was nothing there and we didn't have this prime, or this was our, we're better researchers than artists, but this was our alien that had no wings. This is the alien with wings. Okay? And so what we found, just as we suspected, so the blue bar is when they saw the winged alien. Low power people, if they saw a winged alien, half of them put wings on their alien. I mean, we didn't tell them that, but they just see that example and do that. And we've found the same thing with naming products and marketing studies. They'll follow whatever kind of exemplar is given to them. No difference on the wing, no wing example. High power people, you can't tell whether they saw a winged alien, a non-winged alien, no example, because they usually, it was just kind of random, not very frequent that they would put wings on their alien at all. So completely uninfluenced by having this in the environment. Now, let me just end with one study. I'm going to skip through. We did some stuff on nonconformity. But the final question was, well, this could actually have some really pro-social effects. People think of powerful individuals as being so self-focused and unaware of others, and it is true that they aren't as able to take the perspective of others. But it's not because they're callous individuals and that they don't care. It's because they simply aren't aware of those constraints. They do what they want. And so this would probably say that if they're in a position to do good, they're going to be even more likely to do good than low power people. Again, if you have someone who has a lot of negative tendencies, you could be unleashing a monster by giving them power, but they're much more inclined, for good or for evil, to act on whatever their core values are. So what we did a study. We had people come into the lab, and as they come in, they see that there's this repairman up on a ladder working in the ceiling. Well, they're inside this room, and they hear the repairman fall down and say, "Oh, my back," and they hear the ladder crash down. Well, we had a Confederate, this is an actor we hired, who was trained when they heard the guy crash to just look up, kind of quizzically but unconcerned, and then just go right back to work. So the participants here are thinking, like, is this guy okay? The other guy in the study doesn't seem to be concerned. What am I supposed to do? And then they have to decide, well, because our Confederates trained to just go right back to work, do nothing, they have to decide, are they going to get up and help? And what we had predicted was that if you're a low power individual, you are going to do whatever other people are doing because you follow cues in the environment. High power people shouldn't care. If they want to get up and help, they're going to get up and help. And that's exactly what we found. We only had about 25% of the low power people get up out of their chair and open the door to see if this man who's groaning outside is okay. Versus in the high power condition, we had a majority of them getting up and saying, "Are you all right?" And at the end of the study, of course, we assured them that no harm had been done when we debriefed them. But what this says is that power, again, very subtly, recalling a time you had it, you didn't have it, this can allow the expression of your true attitudes. This can allow people to be more creative in the possibilities they consider. It can allow them to be much better helpers in emergency situations because they don't diffuse responsibility. They don't mimic other people. They do what they feel needs to be done in a given situation. Now, I was going to talk a little bit about what we do, like, well, then how do you get powerful people to have good intentions so that they act on them? But that can be saved for another day. Questions? Either about the ethics and cleansing stuff or the power and corruption? Yeah?
Did you find that dirty people are less ethical or clean people are less ethical? Which way?
So we haven't done it with bodily cleanliness yet. So the ones where we were looking at whether they're ethical or not in returning the money, that was strictly the room. But that's one of the things we want to do next. The tricky part with looking at whether the person is clean or dirty is that it's highly, highly correlated with attractiveness. People think that clean people are more attractive, and so then by default, they think, oh, well, they're more honest people. So we're trying to work that out right now, actually.
So would a cleaner-looking person maybe have more unethical experiences in the past because they're trying to clean themselves?
So he asked a really critical question. Are these people who are really clean, either behavior or acting, are they hiding something from their past? Or is that instead going to predict that they're going to be really good? And what we have found so far is it depends on the starting point. So if you're just at a base level, you're not feeling particularly guilty or good about anything, then a clean environment or cleaning yourself activates a sense of ethicality and you behave consistently with that. So it improves your behavior. If you have something that's gnawing at you, you're trying to redeem yourself, then cleansing is kind of a compensatory thing, and that can entitle or license you to do even worse things. So it's a very tricky question, but that's what we're working out right now, and a lot of it is what's your starting point.
I'll take the privilege of asking the last question and then go back to your first point about power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do I understand your research correctly to suggest that actually what power does is reveal?
Exactly. So if you want people acting in a benevolent way that are in the future going to have power, you have to instill the core values now, because what it will do is reveal the true intentions.
And that's what we're trying to do, and that's why we're so delighted to have you, Dr. Liljenquist, come and visit with us today. Won't you join us?
Thank you.
Reciprocity, and this doesn't excuse my debt, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That was wonderful.
Well, I didn't get